Dennis Hopper hated this film, Bob Hoskins called it a disgrace, and John Leguizamo regretted being in it. This is the first video game adaptation in history. We're used to seeing films and series based on video games released every year. Some successful, some less so. But seeing another game adaptation doesn't come as a surprise anymore. But once upon a time, things were different. In this video, I'll tell you about the very first movie based on a video game and how it paved the way for all modern adaptation, for all those Borderlands, Sonics and Mortal Kombats. In 1981, Donkey Kong was released, an arcade game created by Nintendo and game designer Shigeru Miyamoto. This platformer, primitive by today's standards, but groundbreaking for the 80s, introduced a character named Jumpman, whom we now know as Mario. Originally, Nintendo planned to make a game about Poppy the Sailor, but the rights deal fell through, and that's how we got the famous plumber, Mario. Now, this franchise is a multimedia giant and the best-selling video game franchise in history, outpacing Tetris and Pokémon, selling twice as many copies as GTA, and nearly triple those of the EA's football series. When a new game adaptation hits the screens today, it's often a massive title like The Last of Us, Borderlands, or something from another big franchise like Assassin's Creed or Warcraft. But in the early 90s, when Super Mario Bros. Hit theaters, it was a two-dimensional game you could play on consoles of the time or home computers. This is, for example, what the game about the Mario Brothers looked like on the 8-bit Atari computer. The creators of the film adaptation received a budget of $48 million. A huge sum at that time, and still a considerable amount even now. For comparison, here are some other films that came out in the same year. Jurassic Park, directed by the already well-established Steven Spielberg, with a budget of $63 million. Ace Ventura: Pete Detective, featuring Jim Carrey's first truly big role, $15 million. Carlito's Way, a crime drama by Brian De Palma starring Al Pacino and Sean Penn, with just $30 million. Schindler's List, also by Spielberg and winner of 7 Oscars, $22 million. Now let's dive into how Super Mario Bros. Became the first video game adaptation with a blockbuster budget and a star-studded cast, only to flop at the box office and in audience ratings, with some cast members later disowning the film. In 1990, director Roland Joff decided to move into film production as a producer. By that time, he had directed several well-received films, including The Killing Fields, about the Cambodian Civil War, and The Mission, a historical drama featuring Robert De Niro. As he considered options to launch his producing career, he thought about the Mario Brothers video game franchise, which seemed ripe for a film adaptation, massive popularity, millions of fans, and a major company that would benefit from supporting the film. It's worth noting that at the time the gaming industry was not as developed as it is now. There were groundbreaking, iconic and important games for the growth of gaming, but few could match Mario in popularity. Some games from that era would eventually get film adaptations, but they needed someone to go first, someone to take the initial step beyond the console, arcade machine, or rare home computer. Roland Joff traveled to Japan to meet with Nintendo's then president Hiroshi Yamauchi. The early 90s were a great time for the Japanese company. In 1989, they had released the Game Boy, a portable gaming console that quickly sold out along with Super Mario Land, which came with the Game Boy purchase. When Joff arrived in Japan, he offered the company only $500,000, while several other larger studios were vying for the franchise, offering far more substantial amounts. But Joff managed to outmaneuver the others thanks to two factors. Joff promised Nintendo not just a cute story, but a film with broader appeal than just children, as he put it himself to do for Mario what Tim Burton did for Batman. And the second factor that helped secure the rights, Nintendo would receive all merchandising revenue. I think this turned out to be even more important than the creative vision or story significance. The rights were secured and the preparation process began, selecting the script director and cast. This is probably where things started to go wrong, as chaos ensued from choosing the writers to selecting a director. Even before Roland Joff reached an agreement with Nintendo, Dustin Hoffman had shown interest in the adaptation, as he wanted to star in the film. But as you can imagine, that idea didn't go any further than initial interest. The script selection process was long and painful. Initially, Barry Morrow, an Oscar winner for Rain Man, proposed his version, which brings us back to the Dustin Hoffman connection. Morrow envisioned it as an existential road adventure where Mario was the wise older brother and Luigi, the young and naive apprentice. The script had such strong Rain Man vibes that it was informally dubbed Drain Man. Catch the wordplay? This version was rejected. The next script came from Tom Parker and Jim Genowain, who pitched a bright bubblegum-like story, well suited to the feel of the game, but Joff wasn't impressed. A couple of years later, these writers would earn a golden raspberry for the Flintstones, so perhaps it was for the best that their version was also discarded. They were succeeded by Parker Bennett and Terry Runter. Together with directors Annabelle Jankel and Rocky Morton, they created the concept for the Mario Brothers movie we ultimately received, or at least presented its original idea, which was then altered. Let's pause here on the script. Perhaps if the creators had left it as it was at this stage, the film might have been received differently. But what's done is done. Now let's go back to the director. Actually, two directors, Annabelle Jankel and Rocky Morton, a married couple. In 1988, they directed D.O.R., a tense thriller starring Dennis Quaid, but their entry into the Mario family wasn't because of that. It was due to their work on Max Headroom and their experience with CGI. Or was it? CGI, or computer-generated imagery, was how the pioneering show Max Headroom was perceived at the time. Max Headroom himself was a character on the show who played the role of a journalist with a hyperbolic, satirical style mocking television presenters of that era. However, Max Headroom wasn't actually animated, though that detail was kept under wraps for promotional purposes. The role was played by actor Matt Frewer, who wore heavy makeup, contact lenses, and a rigid plastic costume. Still, this directing duo had direct experience with CGI and were skilled at it, although the technology was far from ideal at the time. Jankel and Morton had directed music videos and commercials, including the first fully CGI-generated commercial for Pirelli tires. In truth, with their experience in creating mystery and working with both technology and practical effects, Jankel and Morton were well suited for adapting Mario to film. Later things would fall apart for them, but that's something we know in hindsight. The directors themselves reworked the script, aiming it at an adult audience. They wanted to appeal to the parents of those who played video games, and this script started to make an impact even before filming began. It immediately attracted Fiona Shaw and Bob Hoskins, both established actors at the time. Later, Samantha Mathis joined the cast. My agent told me to check out this script and that it would be a $50 million movie, which was an incredible sum in 1992, said Mathis, who played Princess Daisy. The script had its issues, but the cast was so impressive that it seemed they would elevate the material to a new level. The script had issues. This seems like the red flag. That should have been noticed at the start, signaling something wasn't right. But the production was already picking up momentum, and the cast continued to expand with both established actors and rising stars. But first, let's look at some actors who could have been in the movie but didn't make it. For the role of Mario, Danny DeVito, who might have even directed it, scheduling conflicts prevented him from joining. For Luigi, Tom Hanks, but his recent box office disappointments deterred the Super Mario Bros. Producers. For Koopa, they offered it to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Michael Keaton, but both declined. The final cast was: Mario was played by Bob Hoskins. He had gained acclaim for Mona Lisa, which earned him an Oscar nomination and a Golden Globe. But even more importantly, that same year he starred in another film that brought him worldwide fame, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So he had extensive experience working with animated characters, and Hoskins looked fit Mario well, requiring no special preparation. I've got the right shape. I've got the mustache. I worked as a plumber's apprentice for about 3 weeks and set his boots on fire with a blowtorch. Hoskins was in. Things were a bit different with Luigi. At the time, John Leguizamo, who ended up playing Mario's brother, was an up-and-coming stand-up comedian and actor. The directors attended one of his performances in a club and were very impressed. Leguizamo was drawn to the action in the script, and he said this about his role: "You always see a lot of Italians playing Latinos like Al Pacino in Scarface. Now it's our turn." Koopa, the main villain, was played by Dennis Hopper, who needed no introduction, Easy Rider, the American Friend, and Apocalypse. Now, and a year after Super Mario Bros., he would appear in Speed, playing another iconic villain. Samantha Mathis, who played Princess Daisy, joined the project early in her acting career. She had done commercials and a few films, and the same year as Mario she starred in The Thing Called Love, receiving strong reviews. But her future projects, including this game adaptation, didn't make her a true star. Finally, Fiona Shaw played Lena Cooper's henchwoman. Shaw was a renowned stage actress with occasional but solid film roles. Many may recognize her today from the Harry Potter franchise, where she played Harry's Aunt Petunia Dursley. 20 years after filming, when asked what is your most vivid memory of working on this film, Rocky Morton replied, humiliation. How did this shoot, which no one wants to remember, unfold? 2 weeks before production started, the directors had a script inspired by Mad Max Blade Runner and the Dinosaur Land from Super Mario World. This was the script that had attracted Hoskins, Hopper and Shaw, and the script that had been approved. But it was decided that 2 weeks before shooting would be the perfect time to rewrite everything. The studio grew concerned that the story had strayed too far from being a family film, even though everything had seemed fine until that point. Ed Solomon, the writer of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, was brought in to fix the situation, and he began rewriting. The directors were against this move but were powerless to stop it. At one point, they were even banned from talking to Solomon to keep him on track. The script kept getting rewritten during filming, often just before specific scenes were shot. One incident occurred while shooting a scene with Cooper that left Dennis Hopper furious. He spent an hour berating everyone, calling the directors amateurs, and saying he had never worked in such unprofessional conditions. The outburst was because his lines had been rewritten just minutes before the cameras rolled. Hopper's tirade paused for lunch and resumed during the meal, as the entire crew heard his thoughts on the producers and directors, the kind of thing people sometimes say about producers and directors, though usually in hushed tones. Ultimately, the scene was shot as written at that moment. But rewriting the script didn't just break the story, it caused issues with the setting with the costume and set designers, and those challenges couldn't be avoided either. Ed Solomon, who was ultimately responsible for the script, later said, "I did everything I could with the script and felt it was at least coherent. It had connected characters and an interesting story. When I arrived on set, I saw that Rocky Morton had chopped it up with a bunch of other things he liked from previous drafts, and new things, literally cut it to pieces and glued it back together. On set, it felt like nothing was definite. The production designers and special effects crew didn't know what they were creating. The actors didn't know what they were playing. The set was chaotic." Speaking of the set itself, amidst the problems, scandals and misunderstandings, there were a few positive aspects worth noting. One of them was the choice of filming location. Dino Hatton, the alternate dimension where much of the action takes place, was filmed at an abandoned cement factory in Wilmington, North Carolina. Credit for this excellent find goes to one of the producers, Fred Caruso. The factory fit the vision of the screenwriters and production designers perfectly. Even now, you can see how this fictional world resembles the futuristic setting of Blade Runner. There's a solid reason for the resemblance. Production designer David Snyder also worked on Ridley Scott's iconic film. Snyder was thrilled with the location choice and the opportunities it opened up. Yet he was equally disappointed by how often and quickly things had to change with each new rewrite of the script. Creature designer Patrick Tatopoulos also put in a lot of work. Knowing that Jurassic Park was being filmed simultaneously, he aimed to make the dinosaurs cuter and more cartoonish. His work was successful. For example, the Goombas were originally minor characters, but after seeing how they looked in real life, the creators decided to expand their role. The visual and sound effects were also high quality. This film marked the beginning of CGI's true entry into cinema. Many innovations were introduced during production, which helped usher in a large-scale shift from practical effects to digital visual effects. In a way, the film fulfilled the creator's initial vision by being groundbreaking, at least from a technical perspective. If you imagine for a moment that the chaos of rewrites and the producer conflicts hadn't happened, Super Mario Bros. Could have contributed a great deal to modern cinema, not just in video game adaptations. During filming, there were plenty of awful moments that damaged relationships on set. After a while, most of the crew grew to dislike the director duo, sometimes calling them the Hydra, because they gave conflicting directions, and sometimes Rocky and Annabelle, the Flying Squirrel, show a nod to the comedy cartoon, the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, which featured Rocky the Flying Squirrel and Bullwinkle the Moose. Hoskins and Leguizamo were so bored that they drank whiskey between takes, which might have led to Hoskins breaking a finger during a driving scene. The film had a 10-week shooting schedule, but as time ran out, so did the money, and much was still left unshot. The directors were pushed to wrap up, forcing the removal of especially expensive scenes, and the final edit was done without their involvement. This was already at the point when it was clear that the production had spiraled out of control. Years later, Bob Hoskins called Super Mario Bros. The worst film he'd ever worked on. Leguizamo mentioned in his autobiography that he hated the film and regretted taking part. Hopper called the project a nightmare, and Samantha Mathis simply said she wasn't proud of it. On May 28, 1993, Super Mario Bros. Hit theaters. It told the story of two plumber brothers facing off against humanoid dinosaur descendants from a parallel dimension led by King Koopa. The Mario brothers needed to save Princess Daisy, captured by Koopa's minions. But the synopsis doesn't fully capture the story's oddity. Then came the reviews. The Los Angeles Times called the movie wildly imperfect on one level and perfect on another, criticizing the script but praising the technical side. The New York Times also praised the special effects and Hoskins' performance, though they were disappointed by the lack of the game's cheerful spirit. The Washington Post admired the acting and creature design. The ratings on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic were similarly unimpressive, and the film's total box office earnings were $38,912,465, far short of the $48 million budget. And remember, that usually doesn't include marketing costs. Can this film be considered a failure? Absolutely. But but now it's gaining a different status. It may not quite be a cult classic yet, but it already has a sizable fan base. Even Quentin Tarantino has helped change perceptions of the movie by organizing a screening at the New Beverly Cinema. Morton and Jankel attended the screening. "I thought there would be 10 or 20 people," Morton said, "but it was crowded. People were lining up around the block to buy extra tickets. The audience laughed and applauded in all the right places. And they weren't doing it ironically, it was genuine." Now, 30 years after its release, you could say it's a fun watch. Sure, the story is chaotic and the graphics may feel dated. How could they not after 30 years? But it has great performances and a unique vibe that older movies bring, especially ones that broke new ground in cinema. Super Mario Bros. Is far from the best video game adaptation, but it's certainly fitting as the first adaptation. In a way, it's a visual tribute to the game series itself, filled with Easter eggs and reminders that anyone can be Mario. All you have to do is turn on your Nintendo. It's a strange movie with a parallel dimension dinosaurs and their descendants and plumbers who save the world. But it's also a movie about two ordinary people challenging danger for the sake of love. It's interesting that the movie ended with a hint at a sequel, though the creators admitted it was more of a joke with no plans for a second film. Yes, if the production process hadn't been chaotic, if there hadn't been constant rewrites, and if the directors and producers had collaborated better, maybe we would have gotten a completely different movie. But who knows? We might have also missed out on this imperfect, rough-edged, yet oddly beloved film. My name is Max, thanks for watching this video. Goodbye, everyone.